The Project 705 Lira class, whose NATO reporting name is Alfa-class, is one of the true marvels of the First Cold War. This Soviet nuclear attack submarine has also affected modern warship designs. Today, we're investigating the Alfa-class that caused panic in the Western navies for a decade. The Alfa-class was a totally revolutionary submarine in its time. Its capabilities forced the West to create a new generation of anti-submarine weapons. The features of this submarine were indeed legendary, but some stories about it were just myths. The Second World War showed that to defend Western European countries, supplies from the USA over the Atlantic were highly substantial. Thus, when the First Cold War began, keeping the sea lines open was a primary concern in the NATO doctrines. Parallel to this, disturbing them became an essential part of the Soviet Navy doctrines. So, Stalin initially desired to build up a global blue-water surface fleet. However, since competing with the mighty Western navies was not economically feasible for Moscow, he changed his mind and ordered more than 1,000 submarines. This plan prioritized quantity over quality. Still, listening to the noisy engine sound of early Soviet submarines was not a problem for the numerous ships of NATO equipped with more advanced sonars. After Stalin passed away, the Soviet perspective in this area radically changed. Toward the end of the 1950s, the U.S.S.R. commenced working on high-quality equipment. In 1957, Soviet engineers launched studies to develop new submarines to overcome the NATO's anti-submarine warfare systems, shortly ASW. The effectiveness of Western active sonars was dramatically low in depth under 300 meters. They were entirely dysfunctional below the 500 meter. Another primary detection system was the magnetic anomaly detector, shortly MAD. This system could detect minute variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by a large metal object like a submarine. So, Soviet engineers began to work on a submarine that would dive below 500 meters and have a small magnetic signature. Titanium was perfect to achieve these goals. Its magnetic signature was low and it was more durable. Also, the Soviet Navy demanded a small submarine. This feature would further reduce the magnetic signature and help increase the speed and maneuverability. Once the criteria were specified, design activities commenced in 1960. Nevertheless, it was not an easy task at all. It would be a highly innovative submarine. The Soviet engineers had to solve many problems, such as processing titanium, designing a new type of nuclear reactor, and developing new automation systems. The early drawings were for a submarine with a 1,500-ton displacement and 16-person crew. But it was too hard for the technology of that time, if not impossible. So, Soviet engineers convinced the Navy to increase the displacement to 3,000 tons and the crew to 30 people. The first Alfa-class submarine, K-123, was laid down on December 22, 1967 at Sivmai shipyard. But she would be launched on April 4, 1976 and commissioned on December 12, 1977. The second submarine, K-64, was laid down on June 2, 1968 at Sudomir shipyard and became the first operational Alpha, which was launched on April 22, 1969 and commissioned on December 31, 1971. She was supposedly taken into the Soviet Navy service in strict secrecy. However, U.S. intelligence quickly realized the crowd in the commissioning ceremony. The next day, the U.S. media announced the creation of the new Soviet super submarine. While K-64 was commissioned in 1971, the other 6 Alphas were delivered to the Soviet Navy in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Why? She had the OK-550 nuclear reactor. During a trial in 1972, the second loop of the reactor's primary circuit failed. In April, the first circuit completely froze and the reactor was shut down. So, the U.S.S.R. decided to equip the new Alphas with the more reliable BM-40A reactors. This work naturally took time. The new submarines were defined as Project 705K due to the change. The complement of the Alfa-class was 32%. The submarine had a length of 81.4 meters, a beam of 9.5 meters, and a draught of 7.6 meters. Its surface displacement was 2,300 tons, while its submerged displacement was 3,200 tons. The submarine had one 155 megawatt BM-40A reactor. Its maximum surface speed was 14 knots, while its maximum submerged speed was 41 knots. The Alfa-class had 50 days of endurance. The submarine had 6 533mm torpedo tubes for the SET-65A and SAET-68 torpedoes, or the RPK-2 Viuga ASW missiles. The submarine could carry 18 to 20 torpedoes, missiles, or lay 24 sea mines. The titanium alloys-made double hull was highly resistant not only to the pressure of the extreme depths, but also to nearby explosions. But this material, which melted at 1668 Celsius degrees, made building and repair efforts too challenging and expensive. Some sources claim that since the hull of K-64 was deformed after she was tested for extreme depths, like over 1000 meters, the submarine could not be repaired and was decommissioned in 1974. But we should add that we cannot confirm this information in other reliable sources. In fact, according to authoritative Russian sources, the standard operational depth of Alfa-class was 320 meters, while its tested depth was 420 meters. The 1000 to 1300 meters diving depth is only a myth rooted in Western intelligence estimates made during the First Cold War. The Western estimations were based on basic metallurgy calculations. So, in the case of a war, Soviet crew would probably push the depth limits and the Alfa-class submarines would go deeper than 420 meters. Still, a 420-meter depth was enough to avoid Western active sonars and ASW weapons of the time. Besides, alongside the titanium alloys-made hull, its relatively small size made the submarine too difficult to detect at that depth by the MAD. To reduce the size, the Alfa-class was designed to be operated by a 32-person crew. Nearly all crew members were officers and NCOs. Only one conscripted sailor was assigned to each Alpha as a cook. In those years, a similar submarine had around 150 personnel. To ensure this feature, the Alfa-class was fitted with highly advanced and extensive automation systems. Thanks to them, the submarine was operated from an 8-person control compartment. During trials, the Soviet Navy observed that this feature increased combat capabilities dramatically, since fewer crew members had helped reduce the chaos while shortening the reaction time. Yet, this innovative design was far from perfect. First, the computer technologies of the time were still primitive. The automation systems of the Alfa-class did not at all provide for system control in emergencies. Also, their reliability was unsatisfactory. On the other hand, due to its design, the submarine allowed only limited entry for crew compartment from the control room and living space. So, it was not possible to perform repair operations while on a mission. It was quickly understood that the automated sonar of the Alfa-class was less effective than the man-based conventional sonar systems. Still, even with its reliability issues, the Alfa-class was a beloved submarine by its personnel since it had an ejectable rescue chamber that enabled the crew to rise to the surface securely. Another innovation was the compact and liquid lead-bismuth-cooled nuclear reactor, which reduced the size of the submarine dramatically. It also offered 1.5 times more energy efficiency in comparison to its peers. The Soviet engineers preferred this design due to several reasons. First, bismuth was the most naturally diamagnetic element, which reduced the risk of detection by the MAD. Second, it had one of the lowest thermal conductivity values among metals and was quickly solidifying in case of a leak. This feature considerably improved safety. Nevertheless, everything came with a price. This reactor could not be shut down since the lead bismuth solution solidified at 125 Celsius degrees. If it ever hardened, it would be impossible to be restarted since the fuel assemblies would be frozen in the solidified coolant. So, The reactors of the Alfa-class boats were kept running all the time they were in service. For this reason, the submarine could not undergo intermediate maintenance before being docked for overhaul. Besides, to sustain combat readiness, these boats were not assigned to long patrol duties. So, just like the interceptors waiting at the airports for the scramble, the Alfa-class submarines were kept at the ports as rapid reaction forces. However, the Soviet Navy did not have the two-crew concept that the US Navy had. This factor reduced their combat readiness and effectiveness. Still, this reactor gave the Alfa-class an outstanding submerged speed. It was officially 41 knots, even though it tested for 45 knots. However, in general use, the submarine cruised underwater with 39 knots. Acceleration to top speed took less than 2 minutes. After the Project 661 Ancha-class, whose NATO reporting name is Papa-class, the Alfa-class was the second fastest military submarine ever built. The high speed caused the noise, which made the Alfa-class an easy target for NATO's passive sonars. To solve this problem, the submarine was equipped with two 134 horsepower thrusters on the tips of the stern stabilizers for low-speed tactical maneuvering. Besides, to reduce the noise, the reactor and many moving mechanic parts were placed on pneumatic shock absorbers. The speed of 41 knots or even 39 knots was too fast for the ASW torpedoes of the NATO of the time. They could not catch such a speedy target. These torpedoes were also ineffective at the diving depth of the Alfa-class. On top of it, the submarine had a mind-blowing maneuverability. It could reverse 180 degrees at full speed in 42 seconds. So, even with its many shortcomings, the Alfa-class was still the perfect attack submarine, which was too hard to detect, catch, and destroy in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Yet, in the military chessboard, all successful moves naturally paved the way for more successful counter-moves. The Alfa-class was not excluded. In the late 1980s, the NATO Navy began to use the 533mm Mark 48 ATCAB and the Spearfish heavyweight torpedoes, which ended the Alfa-class superiority. Likewise, in the 1990s, the USA would take the Mark 54 into service, while France and Italy would develop the Mu-90 Impact. These 324mm lightweight torpedoes would be capable of dealing with the Alfa-class. So, the threat of the submarine had already been eliminated by NATO before the First Cold War ended. Even the Soviet Navy had predicted this outcome and began to work on boats. In the late 1970s, the U.S.S.R. had already designed the Project 671 RTM Shuka submarines, whose NATO reporting name is Victor 3. These boats were not as fast and maneuverable as the Alfa-class, but they were much more silent. The Soviet engineers had already combined the best features of these two classes on the new Project 971 Shuka B-class, whose NATO reporting name is Akula-class, in the 1980s. So, in the 1990s, the Soviet Navy was ready to replace the Alfa-class boats, whose reactor lives were near the end. 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the U.S.S.R. decommissioned 5 boats of the class. The last submarine, K-123, was retired in 1996. The Alfa-class was designed not for the high-tension peace of the First Cold War, but exclusively for serving as one of the most effective naval weapons in the Third World War. Even though the Alfa-class never had a chance to prove itself in combat, the technologies and solutions developed, tested, and perfected on it formed the foundation for the future designs. It was the pioneer of the automation systems on the naval ships. As one of the most impressive and feared submarines of the First Cold War, the Alfa-class is a true legend. Thanks for watching our video, and please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell button to be notified of our new videos. Also, you can now click the join button to support our channel. And as always, we would greatly appreciate all of your likes, comments, and shares.